G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to show you one of the best ankle mobility exercises that you should be doing to not only make sure that your ankles are functioning really well, but that all the structures that rely on good ankle function also have permission to function as good as they can at the same time. And the exercise that we're going to touch on is the banded ankle stretch, but you can essentially use any strap like a TheraBand or TheraTube as well. And if you've been following the channel, you'll know that this is another video in the series of videos that I'm putting up that attempts to cover some of the most important and helpful exercises that I've come to understand as a physiotherapist that I heavily rely on to help improve my patients' dysfunction. And for the purposes of this video, restricted ankles or immobile ankle joints can often play a strong role in why other tissue around that eventually becomes dysfunctional in its own right. So in this video, I want to show you what that dysfunction might look like and then go through how to do the banded ankle stretch the most effective and efficient way possible for you. So let's get into it. So the reason why the banded ankle stretch that we're about to get to is just such an important exercise to practice is because of its impact on stiff restricted ankles. And the reason why stiff restricted ankles are something that you should be aware of, your body will have a tendency to work around that restriction instead of going through that restriction to complete the task. So if you are someone who needs to squat or lunge a lot, or you tend to go for runs, or you just walk around day to day, the presence of hidden ankle restrictions can fundamentally alter the way that you do that over a long period of time, fundamentally setting your entire leg tissue up for dysfunction in some way. And we can often see how this looks in something as simple as a deep squat. So in a perfect world, we should have the indigenous mobility and capacity to keep our feet straight and squat down to the bottom position of a squat. Now, if you are someone who can't get down to that position for a number of reasons, or you feel like you need to alter that squat shape in order to reach the bottom, then stiffness in your ankles might be one of the key components that you need to work on. If you feel that you can only get down to the bottom position of a squat by turning your feet out or by lifting your heels up off the ground, or that you feel like your knees tend to travel inwards at the same time, then what your body is doing is it is altering the way that you can bend your knees to compensate for that ankle restriction. And if your body isn't functioning as optimally as it could be, then the repetition of day-to-day life and the things that you want to do with yourself may start to load up some tissue within your leg differently for long enough that it may then become dysfunctional, sore, not because the tissues themselves are a problem, but because they're the tissue that isn't enjoying the experience that it's having based on the way that your leg is moving, or because an ankle joint is more restricted than it could be. So the banded ankle stretch should be high on your priority of things to at least test out on yourself, just to get a gauge of how stiff and restricted it actually feels for you. So the first thing we need to tick off to perform the banded ankle stretch is whatever band you are using, whether it's the more robust and stronger power band, whether it's a TheraBand or TheraTube, is we need to make sure that it's secured to something, because we want to put a fair bit of tension through the band to really bias the deeper joint capsule. And the reason why we need to use the band is that your traditional ankle stretches, where you just bend your ankle, are often looking to mobilize some of the tight, soft tissue through your calf and Achilles area. But one of the hidden components of a lot of ankle restrictions is that underneath that tight musculature can be rustier, stiffer, restricted joint capsular tissue. Just taking your ankle to the end of its range isn't enough to bias the joint on its own. We essentially need to hook the band under the bones of your ankle joint, stretch that out as far as you feel comfortable, and then as you bend that back ankle, the band is gently pulling the joint backwards, biasing some of the restricted tissue in that joint capsule. And if you're trying to improve your ankle dorsiflexion range of motion, the capsular stiffness at the back of the joint is often the restriction that stops us from opening up and moving as far as we'd like. Again, if you were struggling to point your toes, we'd actually want the band in the other direction to try and bias the front of the joint to again create the space for you to improve that motion. But for the purpose of the banded ankle stretch, we want to stretch it out as far as you feel comfortable, and all we want to essentially get you to do is gently oscillate in and out of that end range. Now, the thing that we need to pay attention to with this exercise is, as you may have noticed before, if your ankle is actually stiffer than it could be, in an attempt to go as far as you can into the end of your range, your ankle will not magically go through that stiffness to improve that range. It will have a tendency to want to go around that stiffness to complete the task. So when you're doing this exercise, make sure that if you have your foot straight, that you rotate your entire leg out on top of that straight foot and almost oscillate in and out of that range on the outside of your foot towards that sort of third or fourth toe, as opposed to potentially oscillating forwards through the big toe. Because again, if we're just going in this direction, we're still going around your stiffness as opposed to going through your stiffness, which is what we need to do to make meaningful long-term change. You can spend 30 seconds to a minute to 2 minutes in this position, just finding the range that you feel happy to be in. Just consistently oscillate in and out of that range. Make sure that if you feel the front of your ankle pinches a little bit, be very gentle. Don't work into that range too much. What can happen is as the back of the ankle joint frees up, it may create more space at the front of that ankle, taking away that impingement type symptom. But again, we don't want to push into any pain, because what should happen is once you've done that, you deserve to automatically feel a little bit lighter and a little bit looser through that ankle straight away. But as we've been doing with each of these important exercises in the series, it's important to be able to turn the exercise up a little bit or scale the exercise up if it's feeling too easy, but also scaling the exercise back to make it easier if it does feel too uncomfortable. And the best way to do that with this, it's very much inbuilt to the exercise, is if it's too easy, you can go out much further. If it's too hard, you don't have to go out as far. We can also make sure that the amount of tension on the band is regulated as well. You can get a thicker band or a harder band if you want to make the effects of this exercise greater. You can wind back to more of a TheraBand or a TheraTube if you feel like it's a little bit too aggressive for you. So once you spend some time working through this on each side, it's also important to have a conversation about why those ankles may become stiff and tight in the first place. And if you've been a fan of the channel, you'll probably know where we're going to go with this. So the final piece of information that we need to pair up with a really powerful banded ankle stretch is why you're actually doing this in the first place. And for me as a physiotherapist who's very passionate about trying to understand why everything is the way that it is, one of the things that I've come to understand is that the single biggest cause for why your ankles could be stiff is heeled shoes. So if you can take a step back and consider what type of footwear you wear the most throughout your day, whether that's your work shoes, your athletic shoes, or even just something as simple as flip-flops, thongs, sandals. If you can look at that external footwear and take note of what type of a heel it has on the back, and again, it doesn't have to be a traditional women's stiletto heel. I'm talking any difference from the front of the shoe to the back of the shoe, then if you see any discrepancy at all, then whatever that discrepancy is the exact amount of ankle range you aren't getting access to for the entire time you're wearing those shoes. And it's not to say that you need to throw out all your shoes and go straight for a barefoot shoe or a flatter shoe. But what it does mean is that if you are trying to mobilize stiffness in your ankle joint and you aren't also pairing that up with better footwear day to day, then it's unrealistic for you to expect that your ankles will magically loosen beyond the level of that shoe. So as always, I genuinely hope that that was helpful and insightful. If it was, please let me know in the comments down below. Is this something that you've heard before? Is it something you've tried before? And if so, how did you go? If this was helpful to you, please leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want more of this type of content. But as always, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.